Hi, I'm Helen.
And I'm Sarah.
And this is the Squiggly Careers Podcast, a weekly show where we talk about the ins, outs, ups and downs of work to give you some tools, some advice and some tips to help you stay confident and in control. It is a weekly show. We're nearly at episode 500, which means there's lots to catch up on if it's the first time you've listened. And there's also lots of support in addition to the episode. Easiest way to access all of our toolkits, all of our one-page summaries, everything that we've got for you to help you learn is to sign up for Squiggly Careers in Action, which is our weekly newsletter. That will be in the show notes, or you can just go to our website amazingif.com and you will find it there.
So this week we're talking about realistic responses to common work complaints. And I'm not sure how motivating that is as a title. Both Helen and I were like, oh, usually we're quite upbeat and we're naturally both very optimistic people. Helen's like super optimistic. If any of you ever done those profiles where you come out as colours, Helen's like as yellow as you can get.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm not very yellow today.
I know you're not.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like, what's it like a mucky yellow colour? Ochre. I'm like ochre. Yeah. Mustard. Today I'm a bit mustard. It's going to be interesting.
Well, maybe it's a good day to talk about complaints then. And the reason that we picked this one is we all complain about work. I think in some ways there's quite a lot of joy in complaining some of the time because it makes you feel a bit better and you kind of get them off your chest. I think getting complaints off your chest can be helpful. But what we were trying to talk about is if you look at the really common things that we like all complain about to do with work, often when we try to then solve those things, you're aiming for like a perfect solution. And you're like, oh, if only. I often feel like you kind of go from this sort of very day-to-day complaint, and certainly if you're me, I sort of then imagine a whole different world. I'm like, well, I'm going to completely clear my week, or like something radical is going to change.
Yeah, or you know, like I think probably you and I probably respond to complaints slightly differently. I think sometimes you'll be like, oh, we'll just stop it on them. We'll just stop it. And you're like, well, that's not a realistic response because you've got blah 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 or whatever. But and what's my what do you think my default would be? To just
keep going.
It'll get better. Let's keep at it.
You're relentless in your, well, I'm going to just keep going. But then I think you're hopeful it's just going to disappear, but without actually doing anything. You're like, nothing's going to change, but the complaint is going to go away.
Yeah, it'll be fine. It'll get better.
It'll be fine. That whole it will be fine when it kind of never is fine. And so we tried to pick some common complaints that we thought might feel relevant for everyone. You might have some different ones, but see if any of these kind of feel familiar. I've got too many meetings and they're not a good use of time. Every time I test that in a workshop, I just get massive reactions. Doesn't matter what role people are in, what kind of company people are in. Nobody sees meetings as like the best moment in their day yet. Let's say yet. So there's always there's a meeting complaint. One just about, I think, volume. You know, it's like I've just got too much on. I would say that's probably how Helen and I are feeling like this morning. We've both had like quite a full-on morning, and you know, you're just like, too much time, and you just complain about, I haven't got enough time to do all the things that I need to make happen. The next one is slightly different to like volume of work. It's sort of what you're doing with your time at work, which is the whole, I've got no time to think, or I've got no time to zoom out, or no time to be strategic. And so that can feel frustrating. You know, perhaps you feel very sucked into the immediate day-to-day needs of getting stuff done. And then the last one, senior people. So senior people are slowing me down, creating a bottleneck. I am sure our team, who sometimes I'm sure listen to the podcast, I'm sure they would definitely say this about us sometimes. I think of at least two examples like right now where I know Helen and I are holding things up, where we have said, oh, like, you know, what's stopping this from happening? And essentially they've kind of gone, well, you are stopping this from happening. And so, you know, they wouldn't say it to us because they're probably too productive and constructive. But, you know, maybe to their partner while they're grabbing a cup of tea, like sometimes so annoying because they say they're going to do something and they don't, or I've messaged them about that 3 times and they've just not sorted it. You know, you're complaining, right? You're complaining about other people. Which one of those for you, Helen? What do you reckon is your most common complaint in a
I was actually just thinking there's probably one we've missed. I reckon there's like too many meetings. I mean, it's the same sentiment, I think. It's just like the too many thing, but probably like communications. You know, I think some people would say like, I've got too many emails, I'm getting too many messages. Like, it's just like, I think that would probably fit in there. Probably the too much to do one, which is obviously a bit recency bias because we're recording this and obviously feeling like it at the moment. But I think, that probably is like the headline one, because then there's you kind of go, oh, why have I got too much to do? Oh, there's too many meetings, or there's too many but actually it's just the too much to do probably feels like the the biggest complaint that I would probably carry with me and bring into conversations in an unproductive kind of way. What
Yeah.
about you?
The same now, but I think probably previously, like kind of when we were both like in big companies, it would have felt different. Big
Mm.
companies, definitely sometimes the senior people one, where I get annoyed that I'd be like, oh, I've got to like wait for a meeting to happen to get something signed off. You know, like lots of sign-offs.
Yeah.
I suppose the complaint there is essentially bureaucracy. I was actually reading a book about that on Friday. It's like too much bureaucracy. It's like slowing me down. It's like a waste of time. Why am I having to get 4 million people to sign this off before I can make this happen? So I definitely would have felt that one. Um, and probably the meeting one more in corporate life than now. We still spend a lot of time, we spend a lot of time like delivering learning and with other people, but I don't have as many meetings now as perhaps I did. And certainly when I talk to people in those companies about meetings, they're often in so many like back-to-back meetings, and I work quite hard to not for that not to be my reality. I think because
Yeah.
you've been there, you're like, I try hard to, I don't want to complain about that one. I get very frustrated if I don't have time to think. That's probably the complaint out of those ones where if I'm complaining about that, that's where I'm most likely to be really dramatic and go, well, that's it. I'm stopping work.
It's interesting, isn't it, what the complaint sounds like? Because I think my too much to do, I don't think I go, I've got too much to do. I'm not sure it sounds like that. I think it's a control thing. Like I hate feeling like I haven't got choice over what I do. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, that has been determined for me. That's probably my my
Mm.
my rant or complaint would come out more like that. But the origins of it is like the too much to do thing, definitely.
So probably worth you thinking for yourself if you're listening to this or watching this, almost in your own words and in your own way. What are your most common complaints? Like, what do you say? That's why we actually had to go at writing them in first person, because then I think you can kind of go, you're probably saying these already to a friend, to another work colleague, to your partner, or whatever. So, what do they sound like for you? And then what we're going to talk through is for those ones, just to give you some examples, what's the kind of the trap that we can fall into when we try to design this perfect solution? And then what would an imperfect solution look like that we hope would be way more realistic, but would help you to make progress? Really on the kind of basis that better to do something than to do nothing or to just keep complaining. Because, I think we can all give ourselves permission to complain some of the time. But, if you keep complaining, it becomes quite demotivating and
Mm.
it's not good for energy. It's not, you definitely get more like pessimistic than optimistic. So it's one of the things actually I look out for is like if Helen and I are complaining about the same things to each other, it definitely makes it sort of triggers something in my mind to think, okay, well, what would an imperfect solution be? Because I think I've tried the perfect ones and they never stick.
Mm. And also, I think the way that we've kind of framed the sort of imperfect responses to common complaints at work today is from a very individual perspective. What can you do? But I
Mm.
do think there is a lot of value in talking about this together as a team. Now, you don't want to turn it into like a big moan zone thing, because to
No.
Sarah's point, not that fun. But I think you could say which of these complaints feels most real to us, and then you could take the imperfect responses we're going to talk about now and say, well, which of these could we try out together? I feel like that would be like a really useful team chat, which is just, acknowledging that of course it doesn't work brilliantly well all of the time. Like that's real life, but we do have a choice about how we respond to it, and we can do that in a sort of
Mm.
pragmatic way. So it's framed for individual today, but I do think, turning this into something a team could talk about together would be I think, a really useful conversation. So we're going to take these in turns. I will take the first one. So the first complaint we're going to work with is the too many meetings. And also the meetings that I'm in don't feel like a good use of time. So sort of complaints around meetings. The perfect response to this kind of things, I think, is sort of completely redesign the way that meetings get done. So I worked in a company that had it was like a no meeting Wednesday. And it was like, we're going to have no meetings on Wednesday. I think they also at the same time said no emails on Wednesday. So it's like,
Oh.
so basically, the idea was you'd have, I think they call it like a detox day or something from memory. But the idea was Wednesday would just be the day when work got done. But the reason that that perfect solution just does not reflect the reality is because you're very, very rarely working on your own. And so actually, I probably do need to get in touch with Sarah at some point. And you then maybe say to someone, oh, should we have a bit of a call? It's not a meeting, it's just a quick call, because we're
Yeah.
not allowed meetings on Wednesdays. And also people that maybe work outside of your little bubble where you're trying to put this perfect solution in place, whether that's your team or your company, they still want to call you on a Wednesday. They still want to put a meeting on Wednesday. And so it's quite an unrealistic way to respond to the problem of too many meetings. We'll just halve our meetings. We'll take a day out each week where we have no meetings. So we think an imperfect solution, a sort of much more realistic response to this particular complaint, is to redesign the meetings that you are responsible for. So, and it's interesting how much percentage of those meetings in your week are the ones you're responsible for, but these are the ones that you have a high degree of control over. And things that you can do, you could make every meeting 15 minutes shorter. So, we often put sort of 30-minute or 60-minute meetings in. Change your 60-minute to a 45-minute, or just put the 15 minutes. I actually want to experiment with this a little bit more in my one-to-ones, is I'm going to make the meeting slightly shorter, but then the last 10 minutes is for kind of the actions. Otherwise, like actions often like accumulate towards the end of the day. And I'd rather kind of get it done within the meeting in the diary. Or co-working meetings. We've actually experimented one of these this morning, with the sort of recognition that we didn't want another meeting to go into people's diaries or another thing to go on the to-do list for this particular thing that we were doing together as a team. So it just got added into the meeting. The meeting was already in the diary. We took 20 minutes to sort of do the work individually, and then the rest of the time was talking about it together. But it meant that it wasn't another action to take away, it wasn't another meeting that had to go in the diary. And these are often things you can experiment with. So the 15 minutes after a meeting, or the kind of co-working meetings, you can experiment with those without actually it introducing too much change or risk into your business. And you can definitely do it with the ones that you are responsible for. You might want to explain to people why you're doing it and what you're hoping to learn, and potentially get a bit of feedback. But it is something that you could try out this week.
Yeah, and I think it was really interesting seeing our team's response to, we essentially repurposed a meeting we already have to do something different. And actually, when I first suggested it, I actually got a lot of relief from people. And I think people were feeling relieved because of not this complaint, but the too much to do complaint. So we were using it to kind of get work done, but kind of co-working at the same time. And the reason people haven't done it before is not that we don't have a motivated team who don't really care, because we do. And it's just because it never ends up rising to the top of the list of priorities, because it always feels it's a classic important but not urgent activity. And I think rather than, I noticed, I was like, I'm just chasing everybody to do this. And I was like, well, this is not fun for me. And I'm thinking, well, why are we not getting this done? Actually, just by kind of thinking about it differently, by just going, well, I can't take meetings, I can't completely change everything, but I can change how we use that meeting once a quarter. That's really easy to do. We did make it slightly longer to give everyone a bit of time for working and then talking. So they kind of got both of those things. And then we did a quick what worked well, even better if at the end, which actually was really valuable to hear what everybody's experience of that was. What had really appealed to people. People definitely want to do it again. And to Helen's point, people hadn't got actions. You don't go away with a big long list. You go away going, well, I've done it. I've done the thing I kind of need to do.
I do think what worked well with that kind of co-working meeting, it was cameras on. So because I think cameras on has a little bit of accountability, and weirdly, like, as in we're all here. The purpose of this is us all getting something done together at the same time, but not necessarily directly with each other. And so cameras on, I think, has much more of a, we're in it together, we're experimenting together. Whereas cameras off, I think, would have felt like, oh, I don't know, maybe people are less committed to the co-working element of this.
Yeah, and there was a moment today actually where I could see people were like, oh, should I just go away and work on this? And I was like, no, let's all stay. We're all going to stay here. And I was like, oh, it's not something we've done. So it did feel a bit strange initially, but then you are like, the accountability definitely just went up, and everybody has done the action. So I think it's just that thing of like, if you are complaining about meetings, and like, who isn't, it's those small, and they are often imperfect, and some bits of it might work, some bits of it might not work. But at least you're trying something. At least you are trying to see whether you can make it better.
Can I just add in one other thing, which is slightly random, but just because I experimented with it last week. Now, it didn't actually work for me, but it might work for other people that have got too many meetings, is that Reclaim AI tool. It helps you with different habits actually in your diary. And one of them being like, if your complaint is I've got too many meetings, what it helps you to do is sort of manage that better. And so you put in like, well, how much focus time do you want in your week? How much time do you want in between meetings? And automatically, based on how much focus time you want in a week and how much time you want to reflect after meetings, it automatically puts that in your diary, along with a slightly passive aggressive comment that you might be able to change that just says like, Helen is no longer available, she has no more focus time left in the
I know,
diary.
I saw it in your diary and it really threw me. I think I was looking for something for like you and I were going to spend some time, and I was like, what's happened to Helen over the weekend?
She's become a bit aggressive, but no, and actually it wasn't quite right for me, partly because of just the way that mine and Sarah's diaries work. But I did think, oh, you could probably soften the tone, and I could probably, start with a bit less focus time, so it was a bit less dominant in my diary. But I think that is an interesting experiment. If you've got too many meetings, actually having something that blocks time out, that stops people proactively putting a meeting in that. I don't think people would have overwritten that time. I think they would have come to me and said, oh, it looks like you're blocked out, can I have that? They would have at least asked rather
Yeah,
than just stuck it in, which
yeah.
might be helpful depending on the direction of the meetings.
So the next complaint, which I think we all have, is like we've got too much to do. It always feels like there's kind of too much to do. And I think the perfect solution, which is sort of not hard to find because people sell millions of books based on this, and you can follow people on LinkedIn talking about it, and you can read about this all the time, is like, right, I am going to become a productivity guru. I am going to follow all of those techniques and things which are going to just make me so efficient. I think a real focus on kind of efficiency. So it's like, those inbox zero people. Or you go, right, I'm going to use the Pomodoro technique. I'm going to start getting up at 5 because by that I'll go for my big long run and be so fit from 5 till 6. Then I'll probably get in some sort of ice bath and then I'll do, I don't know, read some book or whatever I'm going to do. Then I'm going to be so present. I'm going to remove every distraction and just do deep work. So you just kind of have this image. Also comparison here. I feel like comparison can really get in your way of like, how do they manage to get so much done? And so the imperfect solution, I think here, I think there are two things that you could potentially try. So the first one is being able to sort of zoom in and zoom out, but quite quickly on what matters most. So rather than just being like, I'm going to create these perfect days, actually just asking yourself what matters most today, what matters most this week, I think gives you a useful short-term focus. And we are always really clear on what matters most this week, because in our team meeting on a Monday, we do what one thing. So everybody has to say what one thing matters most this week. So we have created that clarity because we always talk about it. And then I just ask myself what matters most today. And that was actually useful advice that I just got from a boss, from somebody who was a founder who runs and still runs his own company. And he was like, there will always be loads of demands on your day, Sarah. But his point was, yeah, but you need to be really clear about what matters most today, because that's where you've got to be like at your incredibly brilliant best. You've got to make sure you're channeling your energy and effort into there. And sometimes that feels hard because I'm like, oh, but that also matters and that also matters. But there usually is one thing that matters most. So I'm not short term at all. I'm not as good at zooming in. So just asking myself that the today and this week really helps. And then for the kind of zooming out, we use, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, and again, we actually did ours this morning, we do a win watch for what matters most this quarter. So again, these are not perfect solutions. They're not particularly sophisticated solutions. But actually having a win watch helps Helen and I to figure out where's our focus. And if we don't focus on these areas, we're probably going to fall behind, or we're not going to make the progress that kind of matters to us. I think there's a bit of like acceptance of it will always feel like there's a lot to do. So that's never going to change. I don't expect that to change. I also don't want that to change because that means I'm excited about all the things that we're working on. But by asking ourselves those questions and having a few sort of, they're basically just like mini small mechanisms, I suppose, for having those conversations, it does always really help me.
That if you do a win watch every quarter, it also at the end of the year, when you have that moment that you're sort of reflecting and you think, oh, what have I done this year? You can clearly look at your kind of quarterly win watch and see all like the wins you've accumulated. Because I think if you've got too much to do, sometimes I don't think you appreciate what you've done.
Yeah.
It just feels like more and more stuff, busy
Yeah.
work. And actually there will have been a lot that you've done, but it hasn't sort of risen to the surface. Yeah, it hasn't kind of popped out, but it does pop out on the win watch. So I think it does become a very motivating thing, I think, to look
Yeah.
back on. And also, if you're in a company that does an annual review, I think it makes that process a lot more efficient as well, because you've got all that in one place.
And then the one other thing I'd recommend just listening back to, if this is like your really big complaint, is we did do an episode on the podcast where we talked about when good enough is great. This I always find harder, but I think through practice I have got a lot better at. Because I sort of care, I have quite high care and quality bar for myself, but also for everybody. I find it really hard sometimes to just like let stuff go. And if we've all got too much to do. If your bar is consistently the same, that's really unrealistic. That's like saying the perfect solution is every single bit of work that I do is going to be the same 10 out of 10 quality, and it's going to get the same 10 out of 10 attention and care. And again, that just can't happen. So there was a good example of something actually we were working on last week where a company wanted to write about Squiggly careers. So they're doing sort of a case study and a press release. And I sort of said to someone on our team, right, how can we review this and get it to something we feel good about really quickly? Because essentially, this can't take more than 10 minutes of our time. We worked out actually, again, working together live was the best way to do that. Because initially, we sort of tried to edit what was already there. And I was like, oh, this is just not working. It's taking ages and it's not the right thing for it. We don't want this to be taking up loads of time. And that was a really good example. I think I start to spot now, oh, this is a good enough is great moment. This is a good enough is great piece of work. And then I definitely have other things in mind where I'm like, no, I'm sticking with my great bar and I'm going to stick with that. And I want to put lots of time and attention because it's on the Wim watch, for example. So I think that distinction also really helps me.
So our third complaint is the one around I don't have enough time to think. And sometimes people might say that. I think sometimes this sounds like, oh, I get no time to be strategic. I think people kind of put those two like things together. But I take it as though I'm not able to put my brain in a thoughtful space, in a reflective or kind of a way of projecting into the future. And so the perfect solution to this that I will often hear people do is like, well, I have a strategy day.
Team away day.
Yeah, we'll do it on a team away day. We have this period of time every year in August where we sort of change the mix of our work a little bit so that we do genuinely have a little bit more space in our diary. But it's very easy to kind of start going, well, that'll happen in August. Well, don't worry, that'll happen in August. And that August becomes our perfect solution. And the problem is it is very, very, very hard to protect that time. You can maybe do it as a one-off, but other people have agendas. You're not operating in isolation. There's other stuff going on in your life and family outside of work. And if you have put like all the emphasis on it happening on that day, like it has to happen on that day, on the 1st of September or whatever's going on, and then you don't have any awareness of other things that might get in the way, then you can often feel even more frustrated than when you started, which is not what we want for people. So our imperfect solution here is to write a to think list. It's almost like this is sort of in two stages. So stage one is like, just get out of your head. This is quite a fast process, I think, this first part, but get out of your head like the main things that you want to think about at the moment. So if I was to put pen and paper now, I might be thinking, I want to think about how Sarah and I are actually going to spend our time in August. Like, what do we want to achieve? I might think about how am I supposed to manage the juggle of childcare over the next couple of months that I'm currently dealing with. So those things are currently on my mind. So you get them down on paper, which I actually think is helpful in itself, because sometimes when your thoughts are going around your head, they can kind of be magnified, but putting them down on paper adds a bit of practicality to them. But then the next thing is you want to do a first thoughts 5 minutes. So you pick something off your list. So maybe I put Sarah and I we're spending some time together in August. What do we want to get out of it? And I'm not going to solve that in 5 minutes, but what I am going to do is just jot some first thoughts down. I actually think setting a timer for this is quite useful. And I might just quickly get some thoughts. And I think you can get quite far in 5 minutes. And it's up to you whether you want to do it as a mind map or a list. It doesn't really matter. It just matters that quite quickly you have created some time to think about something that isn't going to derail your day or require you to schedule next month. We can all find 5 minutes in a day. And I think then you could even share your first thoughts with somebody. Like you could do it as a voice note. There are lots of ways that you could do it. So it then goes from you towards somebody else. But it means that it doesn't just exist as this sort of growing mass in your head. It just becomes something a little bit smaller that you can move forward more easily.
One of the other things that we know, there's some interesting research around self-explaining. So when you do kind of talk to yourself about your own thoughts out loud, it actually does help you to figure out like what you think, what you know, what you don't know. So again, you kind of move forward fast. So what you could do is self-explain for 3 minutes, set a timer, and just be like, I'm just going to say out loud what I think about that. And even when you get stuck, because I do this exercise a lot with people in workshops where I get people to do 3 minute mind maps, when you get stuck, my top tip is always like just stay focused on the question, because it is amazing how that when you get stuck, what comes next is often really insightful, because it's forcing your brain, you've gone past the obvious, and it's forcing your brain to kind of come up with new ideas or new answers. So all you got to do is just stay focused for that time.
I've been using the voice thing on ChatGPT quite a lot. I just find it quicker if I'm like just sort of thinking about something. I was thinking about a random book this weekend. I was like, I might write this book. Obviously, I've got no time to write this book, but I'm thinking about writing this book. Anyway, I was just sort of chatting along to ChatGPT. But I think you could record like a minute or two of your thoughts and then ask it to summarize that into 5 points, because I think you
Yeah,
thinking about it is one thing, and then I think you being able to share that with somebody else, but in a much more succinct way, or you're just dumping, aren't you? You're just dumping loads of stuff.
yeah.
So if you kind of talk to ChatGPT or whatever platform you want to use, and then said, summarize this into 5 points, then that is a much more constructive thing for me to share with Sarah than potentially just complaining to her for 5 minutes
Yeah.
or just like writing a long essay about what's on my mind.
Maybe I should start doing that, because
Love
I
that.
think I think you get the unfiltered version.
I'm
That
allowed to. I'm allowed to get you unfiltered.
that's one of my work-ons. So the last complaint is about basically other people. They don't always have to be more senior, but I think often they are, because they're the bottleneck around if you do have sign-offs, or if you do need someone's approval, or like someone does need to read something before you can send it. And I always think the perfect solution, when you're thinking about this, and I did a lot of thinking about this when I was in big companies, because I did work with lots of senior stakeholders. You were always thinking, oh, if I could just like spend more time with them, like I'm going to try and put in more meetings with them. I'm going to make the meetings with them longer. I'm going to have more regular
Can you
meetings.
imagine if their complaint is, senior person's complaint is, I'm in too many meetings.
Meetings.
Junior person's like
I
solution
need more
is, have a
meetings.
meeting. I mean,
Well, and it's interesting because I see that a little bit with our team sometimes. Like they will less so to me, which is probably feedback for me, but they will often be like, oh, Helen, we'd like more time with you, because Helen does the one-to-ones with our team. And people's default is sometimes more one-to-ones with Helen, longer one-to-ones with Helen. And you sort of go, sure, in a perfect world,
yeah,
where
yeah.
because that feels very perfect world, because nothing's changed for Helen. So where has that extra time come from for Helen to do that? So either you've got to trade something off, or you've got to make a choice, or something has to change, right? Whereas actually, I think the imperfect solution here is thinking about, how does that person you're trying to influence, or who you kind of you need something from, how did they like to spend their time? And then kind of what could you do? So what could you try out that might work better for them? And so one of the things that we found, we've been working with Amber, brilliant Amber, on our podcast over the past few months. And Amber started using Notion, so to kind of write down all of her thoughts and do her reports for us. And then she does these really good videos, which are summaries of kind of what's in that report. Now, what is so good about that is it meant that Helen and I can watch those whenever it works for us. So it mirrors the fact that Helen and I don't ever have 2 days or 2 weeks the same, ever. So she's then created something that just works whenever. It's very kind of flexible. Also, and I only realised this when Helen told me recently, she knows whether we've watched it or not.
I love that.
I hadn't realised that, and I was like, oh, so she knows, oh, you've seen this much of it, or you've watched this much. And I was like, okay, that's quite useful to know. But what I think she has done is kind of probably caught on to the fact that like neither of us wanted more meetings. We do care about the kind of work she's doing, but we sort of wanted her to communicate in a different way. And so that was just, I think, a really kind of smart way of like, we could easily be a bottleneck for Amber, but the reason we are not is because of how she has chosen to collaborate and communicate with us, But I think almost based on asking us some questions and not defaulting to the obvious. Like the obvious thing would have been, oh, well, once a week we'll all catch up and we'll kind of talk about it. And she's sort of gone, well, we could, or what we could do is like something kind of slightly different. And it's just worked so much better. And I don't think there's been too many bottlenecks for her. And also we've enjoyed the process.
It's funny because Sarah and I, like, because we don't have a manager, we sort of mainly manage each other. And we probably are a bottleneck occasionally to each other's work. So if I was mirroring how Sarah works in order to get something done, I would probably say, well, why don't we spend an hour doing it together and then have a bit of a break? Whereas my thing would be, let's work 9 to 12 and not stop until it's done. It's more effective for the other person when you mirror them. It's also just more appealing to them. Like if I said, oh, let's have a long meeting, Sarah, she'd probably be thinking, oh, whereas if I said, oh, look, can we just have a bit of a walk and talk to think it through? Like even that is Sarah's language, like think it through. Whereas my language is get it done.
Because you have that get it done mindset. I wouldn't, if you were my boss, I would never turn up to a one-to-one without like this is what I need from this meeting. And I would use decision discussion agendas with you, because also I'm a big fan of those, to be honest. I think they're really helpful. So I'd be like, right, Helen, I want us to discuss these 2 areas and I want to make 2 decisions. And let's do that in 20 minutes. And if I could, I'd try and give you some time back. I'd be like, I think we might have half an hour, but I think we can.
Can you imagine how appealing that is to someone like me? Yeah, if you have a manager, if anyone has a manager like me, who likes getting it done and pacey stuff, like if I always knew that I met with someone and I got 10 minutes time, I'd be like, I love meetings with them.
Yeah.
Wouldn't even care what we were doing. I'd be like, I love meetings with them. I always get 10 minutes back. It'd be so motivating.
Oh, imagine if you were my manager. I think I would show you something visual and then I would green as we went through and being like, right, well, that's green because we've sorted that. Then I'd do the next one. I'd be like, well, let's get them all to green by the time we finish our time.
Funny. So just such like feedback for Vivi, who works on our team that I was with last week, who had used the Notion thing, had this like checklist and we were going through and I absolutely, because it was like, tick and done, tick and done, tick and done. And it felt like at the end, we're like, oh, but then she's quite like me as well. So I think we both got that little buzz at the end of it. Whereas I think treating a meeting like a to-do list is not very you at all. You'd be like, well, if it's a to-do list, we could have done it in a different way anyway. It does mean you have to be, I think, quite perceptive to understand how different people like to work, but I think that's an important skill anyway. And I do think it means you need to be quite adaptable so that you can take that approach with different people. But it is effective, and there aren't that many senior people that you're really trying to make this work for. So I think it's quite a selective skill, but it's a very valuable one.
I always think about it for our partners. So we might not have managers anymore, but we have loads of big brands that we work with all across the world, and we have those learning partners, and all of those lead people in those companies are all a bit different. They definitely don't all like to work in the same way, and they could definitely create a bottleneck for us, you know, if we need to get some stuff done around like a leadership program we're doing or something. As we were preparing this podcast, I find it really helpful to just create those opposites, because I think what we've described today with all those different complaints is like, start with the sort of the perfect thing, because that's quite fun. I found it really fun to like imagine, and I actually found Helen was like, oh, you're finding this really easy. I did. I was like, oh, I can just do this. I can imagine, oh yeah, for senior people, I just want loads more time, or I'm just going to get rid of all meetings. So just sort of imagine this like perfect world. And I found that quite playful to do. And then you sort of go, well, clearly that's not going to happen. But it makes it easier, I think, because you're creating a contrast. I could do the opposite much easier because I'd sort of started with this perfect reality to then do the imperfect one. And maybe for some of you, you'll find it's the other way around, or kind of your brain works in a different way. But I certainly found that once I got started, you were like, oh, crikey, you're off. You're like,
just loads of ideas. It was quite unlocking. So we will summarise all of these in the pod sheets. So you will be able to see all of the complaints, and you'll also be able to see the sort of perfect, imperfect solutions. And I think back to what we said at the start, if you want to talk about this together in a team, I think the prompt is probably which complaint feels most familiar to us, and then which imperfect solution could we experiment with. And you might want to do a bit of a how else, because we've started you off with some ideas, but how else, what else could we experiment with, could be a good conversation to have together.
But that's everything for this week. As always, thank you so much for listening. We know loads of you share the podcast with other people, which we really appreciate. And we always love hearing from you. We're Helen and Sarah at squigglycareers.com. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.